This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best way to make an amazing website. Let's be honest, is the new 14-inch MacBook Pro really worth $1,000 more than the M1 MacBook Air? Well, today we will find out because we are gonna compare a bunch of real-world tasks such as regular everyday use, SSD speed, some different benchmarks, photo, video editing, battery life, speakers, webcams, and general stuff that people do to see if it's worth actually spending the money. Both of these machines have 100% battery, so we are going to unplug them. And we know the 14-inch, even though they're amazing machines, they do suck more power, so it's gonna be interesting to see as we go through what the battery life is like. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and start out by comparing the exterior differences because the M1 MacBook Air is this nice, slim, wedge shape. I loved the comfort and the lightweightness of this machine, only 2.8 pounds, but the new 14-inch MacBook Pros, they have that square design that feels a lot chunkier. It's definitely heavier. The footprint is larger in both dimensions, and it is thicker as well, especially on the wedge edge. And I gotta say that I definitely prefer the design and the slimness of the MacBook Air. If you care about portability, it definitely is a lot lighter and more convenient to have with you. Now with that, we also have some differences on the bottom. The 14-inch MacBook Pro has these cutouts on the sides and the back because it does have two fans, whereas the M1 MacBook Air is completely sealed because it's completely fanless. But with that said, we will actually test to see if we can even hear the fans on the 14-inch or if it's still silent a little bit later in the test. Now, talking about ports, on the left-hand side, the MacBook Air only has two Thunderbolt ports, whereas with the 14-inch, we have those same two, but they're Thunderbolt 4, will have full display support, meaning they can actually support two displays, one through Thunderbolt and one on the other side through HDMI, whereas the MacBook Air can only support one external display. With that, you don't have to use one of those ports to charge because we have MagSafe, which is really nice and convenient, and then we have the headphone jack on the left-hand side, so it doesn't get in your way if you're using a mouse. On the other side, the MacBook Air just has a headphone jack compared to an HDMI port, which is super convenient, and an SD card slot, which means you don't need any dongles along with that third Thunderbolt. Now, before we open these up, I have to tell you guys about our giveaway. We're giving away one $2,500 14-inch MacBook Pro. It's not this one, it's a higher end one, to one of you lucky people out there. All you have to do is one, be subscribed, and two, comment with these launch week videos. We're making them up until Tuesday, 1 week from launch, and then we're choosing a winner. So make sure you guys come back every day. We post at 7 a.m. Pacific. Check out our videos and comment below. And I don't care if you're anywhere out there in the world, we will ship it to you, we will pay import taxes, whatever it is, and get one of these in your hands. And now let's take a look at the insides. The 14-inch has full-size function keys, and then it has a larger trackpad, but to me, that really doesn't matter, and the keyboard feels identical on both. So even though we have this new look, in either way, it doesn't make a real world difference. Now, what probably sticks out to you is the notch. Yes, MacBooks now have a notch. We are gonna talk all about the displays where we have a ton of differences in just a sec, but first, I wanna compare the speakers. The 14-inch now has a crazy speaker system, so let's see if we can tell a difference. All right, guys, wow, what a difference. The MacBook Air already had one of the best speakers in terms of Ultrabooks, but this new 14-inch, it just kills it. We have those dedicated woofers that move a ton more air this year compared to the 16-inch setup last year. So if you care about movies or music with the built-in speakers, this one is the way to go. It is just incredible, almost like adding a subwoofer to your car. Now, as far as the webcams and microphones, this is the MacBook Air's 720p webcam, which has better processing due to M1, and it has really good microphones as well. But the 14-inch MacBook Pro has a 1080p webcam with an f2.0 aperture, and it has upgraded studio microphones. So you guys let me know which one looks better and which one sounds better and how much of a difference you see down in the comments section below. And now let's get into the displays. The new 14-inch has a higher resolution display. We have 6 million pixels compared to 4 million. But with that said, I can't see a noticeable difference to my eyes. Now, people have mentioned that you have 2 times scaling, just like on the iMac, so it is easier on the eyes if you're reading a lot of text, but to me, I don't think that's a deal breaker. Both these are 16:10, but because of the notch, Apple actually added extra pixels where we have that menu bar, so you're not really losing out on anything with the notch, and of course, we have these nice slim bezels all around. Now, with that said, if you ever maximize a window or an application, that notch gets hidden, so it's not distracting if you're doing work or watching videos or anything like that. And as far as color accuracy, the latest M1 MacBook Airs also support DCI-P3, so if you're doing photo editing, video editing, there's no difference in terms of color grading and things like that. Now, yes, the 14-inch does support HDR content. We're gonna cover that in just a sec. But in terms of brightness for regular use, it is still limited to 500 nits instead of that crazy 1000 or 1600, whereas the MacBook Air is limited to 400 nits. So you do have the brightness difference that you guys can see with our top camera, but looking from the side camera, you guys can see that the viewing angles are also a lot better with the new 14-inch. Now, when it comes to playing back HDR photos or video, you guys can see the difference. You don't see the full thing because this is not an HDR video for maximum compatibility, but look how much brighter the HDR mini LED screen that goes up to 1600 nits on the 14-inch looks. The highlights pop like crazy. Not only that, the contrast is also better at the same time. So if you're watching HDR videos or movies, the experience is much better. And if you want to edit HDR video or even HDR photos, you need to have the 14-inch. Now, the new display can have some blooming if you're watching in the dark with the brightness maxed out with high contrast text and things like that, but the MacBook Air has blooming across the whole screen because it has a single backlight. And because of that and the HDR screen, it looks amazing for watching movies in the dark. The contrast levels are pure black or as close as you can get without OLED, but the brightness is way better than OLED, and it makes for an amazing movie watching experience, especially with those crazy speakers. Now, those aren't the only differences. We also have ProMotion on the 14-inch, which means it can go up to 120 Hertz, which makes everything super smooth in the menus when you're scrolling, and it's great for gaming if you want to do some of that, but also it can go down to 24 to save your battery life if you're watching videos. So let's be honest and talk about, does that screen matter that much? Well, right now I gotta say, if you're buying a $999 MacBook Air, or actually for like $929 or maybe even less on Amazon, we'll leave a link down below, that's a $1,000 jump, and that makes it hard to justify. But if you're buying a MacBook Air with 16 gigs of RAM and a 512 gig SSD, just like this 14-inch comes with for that $2,000 price, that is a $600 jump. And then at that point, that might be enough to justify having this super nice display along with the better speakers and the other upgrades. And that display alone is just so amazing. So it's really up to you how much you care and how much you watch videos if you can make use of that. Now that we mentioned SSDs, let's check out the speed difference. The M1 Air was a big improvement over the previous Airs. We have 2,100 write and 2,800 read, but these new ones are insane. We have 4,600 write and 4,800 almost read. So the SSDs are basically twice as fast compared to the Air. Now, does that matter in the real world? And I have to say, no, I don't think so. It could matter if you're buying the highest end new MacBooks and pushing them to the limits, but for regular use, you don't really notice the difference. Now, before we get into the performance test, let me give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. If you've been thinking about making your own website, Squarespace is seriously the best way to go. You can build a great looking website like we did with literally no web making experience. It doesn't matter if you want a portfolio, a blog, e-commerce, or anything else, you just choose from one of their great templates and easily customize customize it. It's incredibly simple, it's affordable, and our sites have been running flawlessly for years now, bringing in tons of traffic thanks to its built-in SEO tools. Start your free 2-week trial with no credit card required by going to squarespace.com/maxtech or by using the custom link down below. And when you're ready to launch, you will save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And now let's get into performance. I'm gonna start out with Geekbench 5. And the new 14-inch comes with the M1 Pro chip, but for $2,000, you actually get a binned version that comes with an 8-core CPU, only 6 of those are high-performance cores, and a 14-core GPU instead of a 16-core. Now, our $1,000 MacBook Air is also binned, but it's only missing 1 out of 8 graphics cores. The CPU still has 4 high-performance cores, so it's gonna be interesting to see how these compare. Now, with that, we're also gonna do a video comparing the 14-inch binned version compared to the unbinned, which costs $300 more. So make sure you guys have those notifications enabled if you guys want to see that, along with other videos like comparing 16 gigs of RAM compared to 32 and comparing 14-inch to 16-inch as far as thermal throttling. All of those videos are coming up. All right, guys, we have the scores and look at this. The single core is less than a 1% difference, almost identical. And that's what you're going to use day-to-day, simple tasks, opening up folders, stuff like that. You won't notice a difference. Now, as far as the multi-core score, we do have a difference of 27%, and that's what those 2 extra performance scores get you with the 14-inch. And in just a bit, we'll see how that makes a difference in the real world. And now let's go ahead and test out the graphics and compare the 14-core binned compared to the 7-core. And bam, we have our results, and it looks like we went from 18,800 to 35,400. So no, going from 7 cores to 14 does not exactly double the performance, but it is 88% better performance. Now, the other thing we have to keep in mind is that the MacBook Air is fanless, so during an extended load, we could have a bigger difference, and we'll check that out in just a sec. And now let's get into gaming. I have 3D Mark's new Wildlife Extreme, which is the latest to test gaming performance with metal acceleration, and I'm gonna use the Extreme Unlimited mode. Let's go ahead and get this started. That is because we're gonna run this off screen to make sure the resolution doesn't impact the scores and ProMotion doesn't impact anything. And one thing that I wanna test is limitations for throttling, because we do have a fanless MacBook Air here. All right, we have our scores, and the MacBook Air got 27.1 frames per second compared to 55.5. So in this test, if you're gaming, we literally get double the scaling, just slightly more than double the performance while having double the cores. Now, when this test was running, I did not see any throttling for the graphics. The temperatures were fairly low, and of course the 14-inch will not throttle, but if you're doing very heavy extended tasks with CPU and GPU use, the MacBook Air will throttle, but realistically it's not enough to make a huge difference based on our tests compared to the other M1 Macs. Now, speaking of throttling, I'm gonna test out Cinebench's throttle test. It's gonna run for 10 minutes, and this is actually a benchmark that is for 3D rendering. If you guys are interested in that, it's gonna push the CPUs to their limits, and of course, the MacBook Air is fanless. Now, with the 14-inch, it's been already a minute of the test, the fans are still off. So for most tasks, that means that even if it's short bursts of 100%, the fans are gonna stay off. Now, I'm gonna let this run for another 8 or 9 minutes until the end, and we are gonna use my thermal camera to see how hot does the MacBook Air get. Does the bottom get super hot, and how much does it thermal throttle? Oh man, it literally just started spinning up the fans, and it's already been over 2 minutes. 2 minutes and 15 seconds before the fans spin up at all. And right now, we don't have the exact CPU temperature, but the hottest temperature inside is showing 50 degrees Celsius. On the MacBook Air, we are looking like the CPU performance cores are at 95 degrees, and they have been for, what is it, a couple minutes now, or about a minute? So it looks like, yes, right away on the MacBook Air, it does get hot, and we'll see the frequency at the end. We are almost done with the test, and the MacBook Air has been pinned at 95 degrees Celsius the whole time, and the 14-inch, even though the fans are up probably about a third of the way, it is still silent. It cannot hear it over our HVAC system, which is crazy. And we don't have the exact temps, but the hottest temp is at 56 degrees Celsius. Now let's go ahead and bust out my thermal camera here. We have a big hotspot where the heatsink is at 44 degrees Celsius. the MacBook Air is actually cooler at 40 degrees Celsius for the hottest spot. Now I also want to go ahead and pick this up and take a look at the bottom of it. Right there, we have that big heat spot at 40 degrees Celsius. Of course, our 14-inch has vents at the top, so exhaust here, but the bottom is also at 40 degrees Celsius at the hottest spot, meaning that if you care about the heat on your lap, we're not really seeing a difference. All right, guys, we are done, and I am shocked for one specific reason. First off, let's talk about the scores. We have 6,748 compared to 9,506. So even though we saw a difference of 27% in Geekbench, when we're pushing these to the limit, we have a difference of 40%, and that is because of the thermal throttling. So with the MacBook Air, after about halfway through, it's throttled all the way down to 2.35 gigahertz instead of 3.2, whereas the MacBook Pro sticks at 3.2 gigahertz the whole time. Now, the reason why I'm shocked is the fact that we literally, after 10 minutes of 100% CPU usage, we could not hear the fans. This thing was still silent. So if you care about silence, there's no reason to go for the MacBook Air if you can afford the 14-inch. Now, what I want to do next is push this machine to its limits because I want to see if the fans can ever get loud on it. So I'm going to max out the CPU right now. I'm going to go back into 3D Mark Wildlife, and I'm going to go ahead and run that extreme test as well. So we're maxing out both the CPU and we're maxing out the graphics at the same time. Let's see what happens with those fans. All right, guys, it's been 2 minutes of looping both the CPU test and GPU being maxed out. Now we can finally start to hear the fans. They're at about 75% or so. So that took longer than expected to have those ramp up. And after 2.5 minutes, they are completely maxed out. And really, by the sound of it, actually go manually and enable those. And what's really surprising is that even with the fans maxed out, they are not that loud. What do you think, Vadim? Was a 13-inch actually louder than this?
Maybe.
So on all these days of testing, we have never had the fans get even like halfway, but when we force 100% for both CPU and GPU, give it a few minutes, it maxes out, and they're still pretty dang quiet. That is surprising. Now, for those of you that want to work with Logic, both of these machines are excellent. The M1 MacBook Air can do about 88 tracks in the new Logic benchmark test. You guys can find all the details of the benchmark online, whereas the 14-inch base model, it can handle about 115 tracks with the same test. So that's about 30% more performance, and that kind of lines up with the CPU differences. Now, what I will say is for Logic, if you're gonna use a lot of plugins, you will want to upgrade the MacBook Air to at least 16 gigs, which is actually the most you could do here. And if you're gonna do a lot, you have the opportunity to go higher with the 14-inch. And for those of you guys that wanna do some programming, we are gonna test out Xcode. And thank you to Max Armenko for creating this benchmark for us and this terminal command that launches it. Bam, and our results are in, and look at that, we took 146 seconds for the M1 Air and 110 seconds for the 14-inch binned model. That's a performance improvement of about 32%. Now, if that difference is worth the money is gonna be up to you depending how often you compile code. But with that said, even the M1 MacBook Air is so much faster than past Intel models. It is an insane difference. So the performance here is still excellent. You can actually download this online and test out your system. And what about if you wanna do a bit of 3D design? Is the MacBook Air enough? Well, I have the latest version of Blender that is optimized for Apple Silicon, and we are gonna go ahead and render this sample project called Party Tug that you can actually download on their website. This one actually uses metal, so it's using the graphics. We'll see what difference we get here. All right, that was really fast. Our MacBook Air took 18.93 seconds, almost 19 seconds, compared to 9.73. So the 14-inch with the 14-core graphics is almost twice as fast, which you would expect, and both of these are actually extremely fast for a tough scene like this because of their unified memory compared to older Intel processors. So once again, you can download this, make sure it's completely preloaded before you render, and compare these systems to yours. And now for the photo editors, I have Adobe Lightroom over here, and I have to say, that real world performance is slightly quicker on the 14-inch. Not a huge difference, but you might have a little bit smoother brushes. Now, the other thing we have here is 8 gigs RAM versus 16, and RAM does help for photo editing, especially when you're doing batch processing. So I would say if you do a lot of that, you do want 16 gigs of RAM. And now let's go ahead and run an export test. I have 50 42 megapixel raw images here, all graded, ready to go out to JPEG. So let's see how long it's gonna take. Now check this out, guys. While this is running, look how much RAM is being used. On the 8 gig MacBook, we have 6.5 gigs of RAM out of 8 used, but another 6 gigs of swap, meaning it's writing files to the SSD. And of course, the SSD, even though it's super fast, it's not as fast as the 14-inch. Now on this one, we have 16 gigs, and 14 gigs out of those 16 are being used, and we're still using swap memory to the crazy fast SSD. So both of these would like to have more RAM if we had it available, and it would speed stuff up a little bit. Now, as I may have mentioned, we are gonna be doing a 16 gig versus 32 gig video soon, so make sure you guys check out that video. Bam, we are finished, and our MacBook Air took 2 minutes and 46 seconds, and then the 14-inch MacBook Pro took 1 minute and 42 seconds. That is 63% faster, and that's interesting because the CPU difference is what, 30% or so? Now that is because one, we have the extra RAM, but even more important than that, this is using 16 channel memory, so it has twice the bandwidth, and that also helps, meaning if you get 16 gigs on this one, it might be about 20-30 seconds faster, but it will not be as quick as the new MacBook Pros. Now, of course, in the real world, unless you're somebody that's editing 50, 100 photos a day or 1,000, like a wedding photographer, you can wait a little bit longer and, you know, have the export take longer. It's not that big of a deal, but it could add up enough to wanting to spend the extra. And now for the video editors, we are gonna test out Final Cut Pro. For the footage that most people work with, which is H.264, both of these machines do incredibly well in Final Cut and also in DaVinci Resolve. And I've been using the M1 MacBook Air for almost a year now, editing a ton of my videos because most of it can handle. Right now I have 2 LUTs applied and film grain, and it's running just fine. Now, the issue comes in if you end up doing tougher footage or stacking even more effects, which we'll show you. But the first thing that I wanna do is an export test with this new M1 Pro chip. Let's start the export and hit our timer. As you might be able to see with the M1 Air, our graphics are at 98%. They are maxed out compared to only 64% on the 14-inch. That is because with this machine, the encoders are limiting the export, not the CPU or the GPU, whereas with the MacBook Air, we don't have enough graphics performance to go any faster. But as you guys can see, the export times are very, very close. And that is because projects like these, even with a couple LUTs and a film grain applied, they're not that difficult. So don't think if you spend the extra money, you automatically will have faster speeds. If you do want the fastest export speeds, you have to buy the M1 Max chip, which has double the encoders, meaning it could go up to twice as fast for something like this. But then you gotta ask yourself if it's worth paying at least $2,900 for that. And the times are 2:55 and 3:08, so it's only a 13-second difference. Now, you could export this project to H.265, and then both would be a lot faster, about half the time for this test. But once again, this one, the 14-inch, will still be a little bit quicker. Now, the real difference comes in if we are working with tougher projects. I'm gonna export this red RAW project, and the MacBook Air took 2 minutes and 32 seconds for only a 1-minute project compared to 1 minute and 28 seconds. So that's a difference of about 73% faster, even though we're still exporting H.264, so we have those encoders there. Because of the much higher graphics load, we see that 73% difference instead of just a 7% difference. So if you really start pushing the MacBook Air, that's when it's really gonna start slowing down. And the last thing I have to mention is ProRes or ProRes RAW footage. Even though they are smooth for both. Once you start adding effects, the M1 Air will start getting limited. And then if we go and export a project, the 14-inch MacBook Pro absolutely flies through it. It's already at what, 40% right here compared to just 10. And that is because it has dedicated decoders and encoders for ProRes and ProRes RAW. So if you're somebody that works with these codecs, I would definitely think about investing the extra money for a 14-inch. Wow, right there, the 14-inch just got done. Took 1 minute and 7 seconds, where this one was only at 25% in that time, meaning it takes about 4.5 minutes to export a 5-minute project. Still fast, but nothing like the 14-inch. And now let's talk about battery life. We've been testing for multiple hours now. How long? Maybe 3 hours or so?
Probably 3-4.
3-4 hours. Let's take a look at the battery life on the M1 MacBook Air. We are at 44% battery, and on the 14-inch, we are at 46%. Now, how does that make sense when the 14-inch takes so much more power for its display and more powerful CPU and graphics? Well, first off, its battery is 40% larger compared to the MacBook Air. And second, along with that, even though it uses more power, it did a lot of those benchmarking tasks much quicker while we had to sit and wait for the MacBook Air. And before we got into benchmarks, the MacBook Air was actually leading in battery life. So what this means is, for a really easy, simple task, even though the battery is smaller than the MacBook Air, it still will give you maybe 1 to 2 hours battery life for web browsing, email, maybe watching some videos. But if you start doing tougher tasks like gaming, photo editing, video editing, coding, that kind of the stuff, you will still get better battery life with the 14-inch MacBook Pro. So if you were worried about battery life, do not worry with this new MacBook. Now, before we give our final verdict, I want to give a shout out to our merch. This is the M1X hoodie. Now, we did do the Sharpie edition for the shirt, and I think we have one for the hoodie as well, right, Vadim? Sharpie edition?
Yep.
We do have one. We just don't have a silver Sharpie. But if you've made it this far, if you guys enjoy our videos, go and check out our merch. We have a lot of great designs, and you can use the promo code M1Pro for 20% off for a limited time. We would greatly appreciate it. And of course, if you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and subscribe, comment below so you guys can win a $2,500 14-inch MacBook Pro. And if you don't care about winning, do it to help us reach our goal of 1 million subscribers before the end of the year. We would greatly appreciate it. And with that said, what is the final verdict? Let's answer the original question. Is the M1 MacBook Air good enough, or is it worth spending $1,000 more for the 14-inch? Well, as we guys showed you all the differences, you get a lot more for the money. You get extra ports, extra displays, a much nicer screen, much nicer speakers. You're getting a lot for the money. But if you don't push him hard, you use simple tasks, the M1 MacBook Air is much lighter, it'll get better battery life, and you're saving so much cash. You can literally buy one as a gift for a friend or family member. And even if you start doing photo and video editing and you're not doing extreme stuff, in coding and logic, it still does such an amazing job. So for most people, unless you're going to the extremes with productivity, the M1 MacBook Air is enough. It's just mainly, do you want the extra updated features, new design, new display, that kind of stuff. So if you want to save some money, get yourself the M1 MacBook Air. We actually have links below to Amazon. They have great sales on there. Right now, I think it was $929 to pick one up. I don't think you will be disappointed, so don't feel like you are missing out. So there you guys go. There is our full comparison. Thank you guys for watching. Click that circle above to subscribe once again. We have a couple great videos right over there. This has been Max, and I will see you in the next video.